We are nerding two of the secret followers of Jesus. Now, I'm sure there were many secret followers of Jesus back in that first century, in those dangerous times, but we're going to mention two tonight because they had a large part in this crucifixion story. That would be Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Hi, I'm Pastor Brenda. Thanks for nerding along with us. At our church, we love to do this. We love the conversations all these nerding facts lead to. So thanks for being here. If you like this, hit like, hit subscribe. Now let's dig into these two major players who we don't know a lot about actually. John 19:38-40. Afterward, Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple of Jesus because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. When Pilate gave permission, Joseph came and took the body away. With him came Nicodemus, the man who had come to Jesus at night. He brought about 75 pounds of perfumed ointment made from myrrh and aloes. Following Jesus' burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with the spices in long sheets of linen cloth. So first, again, Joseph of Arimathea, these are the historical notes that I could gather about him. All four Gospels independently name him. This gives credible history that he was a real person. Matthew 27:57, Mark 15:43, Luke 23:50-51, and John 19:38. He was rich, but we have no history of how he accumulated his wealth. Matthew actually refers to him as a rich man. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, which was an assembly of 20 to 23 people appointed in every city in Israel. Early Christians were unlikely to invent a Sanhedrin member as the one who honors Jesus, as we will see that Joseph of Arimathea does in a huge way. So this detail would be embarrassing or inconvenient, which again gives more truth to the accuracy that this man existed and this man had this role to play. Arimathea was a city of Judea, 20 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Joseph did not consent to Jesus' condemnation. This is recorded, Luke 23:51, but he had not agreed with the decision and actions of the other religious leaders. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come. What does that statement mean? We're not going to get to that. He was a disciple of Jesus quietly. Matthew calls him a disciple of Jesus. John adds that he was secretly for the fear of the Jews. Joseph courageously asked Pilate for Jesus' body. Here is his moment. Requesting the body for an executed criminal was risky and very unusual. Mark emphasizes that Joseph took courage to approach Pilate. So Roman permission was required for burial. Asking Pilate for the body of Jesus made Joseph ritually unclean because he would have been touching a corpse and then also taking the body of a criminal. This is just rare. The design of crucifixion was humiliation as a way to teach or keep the little people in line. The bodies were meant to be on the cross until the birds ate them for days and days and days to teach the lesson to the little people that Rome was in charge and you will not disrupt what Rome was doing. Any Jew would have been repulsed at what Joseph did for all these mentioned reasons. Joseph provided the tomb which Jesus was buried in. He provided a proper burial for Jesus. So he not only did he ask Pilate for the body after Jesus was dead within those 6 to 8 hours probably, which is early, another story for Good Friday. He also prepared a tomb for Jesus' body to go into. This fulfills Isaiah 53:9, which says, he had done no wrong, had never deceived anyone, but he was buried like a criminal. He was put in a rich man's grave. How about that? If no tomb, Jesus would have been buried in a shallow grave with criminals or dumped into Gehenna, Gehenna, which was a local garbage dump. This, of course, was after hanging on the cross for days, birds eating off of him, the decay happening on the body, serving as a statement to the powers of Rome. The Bible notes that this was a new tomb, which is interesting because with the new tomb, there were no other bones in that tomb. So when Jesus was resurrected, there was one body, and the one body was gone. No false theories or conspiracy theories could happen because there was another body there, and maybe those bones are actually Jesus, and none of that. This was a new tomb, a little fact that could really end the false conspiracy theories right quick. Who knew? Joseph also provided the linen that covered Jesus' body. Some call this linen the Shroud of Turin. It's noted that Jesus was swaddled at birth in linen, and then in death, he was also wrapped in linen. We're going to talk about that Shroud of Turin coming up in a bit. This is what we do not know about Joseph of Arimathea. It's kind of a lot. How long Joseph had followed Jesus, whether he remained a disciple after the resurrection or not, whether he interacted with the early church at all, and any details of his later life. We know this section. It's a big to-do, but we know so little about him. And then looking into the legends of these people, during the 12th century, Joseph became connected to the Arthurian cycle, appearing in them as the first keeper of the Holy Grail. You may think Indiana Jones at this moment. You may think Monty Python at this moment. But this Arthurian legend stuff, is quite popular, and he doesn't pop up until then in our history. Joseph's actions were temporary, practical, and emergency matters. Jesus died too soon. Again, more on that on Good Friday. The Sabbath was coming, and the bruised dead body needed a proper burial. In a proper Jewish burial, it would take 7 days. Jesus' body needed protection from nature and animals, so Sabbath could be observed by everyone with this burden taken care of. Let's go to Nicodemus. Let's look at him in John 7. We know him famously from John 3 and his visit when he came to Jesus at night. Here we get John 3:16 and some other great teachings from Jesus. Let's look at this other reference in John 7. When the temple guards returned without having arrested Jesus, the leading priests and Pharisees demanded, "Why didn't you bring him in?" "We have never heard anyone speak like this," the guards responded. "Have you been led astray too?" the Pharisees mocked. "Is there a single one of us, rulers of Pharisees, who believes in him? This foolish crowd follows him, but they are ignorant of the law. God's curse is on them." Then Nicodemus, the leader who had met with Jesus earlier, spoke up. "Is it legal to convict a man before he's given a hearing?" he asked. They replied, "Are you from Galilee too? Search the scriptures and see for yourself that no prophet ever comes from Galilee." We get this blip. Nicodemus speaks up after he visits him in John 3, because this is John 7, and speaks up on behalf of Jesus. And then we don't hear from him again until the crucifixion story. So the historical notes on Nicodemus. The only clear historical source of Nicodemus is the book of John. John identifies Nicodemus as a Pharisee and a leader of the Jews, likely a member of the Sanhedrin also. This places him among the religious elite responsible for interpreting the law, like Joseph of Arimathea. Nicodemus famously sought Jesus privately at night, early in Jesus' ministry. He was curious early about Jesus. Now, scholars note, and there's a lot to do with this, I don't know what your assumptions are in this, but let's think. The coming to Jesus at night may suggest he was afraid, cautioned for being seen by other people, Maybe he just wanted uninterrupted conversation with Jesus, and he could find that at night when he was inside, not with crowds gathered around him. Could be any of those. Nicodemus stayed in the Jewish leadership throughout, as we will learn. After Jesus' death, Nicodemus appears again, and this time openly, in John 19, 39 through 42. With him came Nicodemus, the man who had come to Jesus at night. He brought about 75 pounds of perfumed ointment from myrrh and aloes. Following the Jewish burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with the spices in long sheets of linen cloth. The place of the crucifixion was near a garden where there was a new tomb never used before. And so, because it was the day of preparation for the Jewish Passover, since the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there. They had to put the body somewhere, right? This matters so much. Notice he brings 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes, and he assists Joseph of Arimathea in the wrapping of the body and the placement of the body. The two of them secret no longer as they take the body of Jesus and take care of the body of Jesus. Now, the 75 pounds is costly. It is expensive. So Nicodemus also must have been rich. And the amount exceeds normal burial practice and resembles royal burial customs. This was not normal. This was a statement. The women who went to the tomb on Sunday morning or Easter morning also brought with them spices and ointments. That means the women were not aware of what Nicodemus had done. Why would they, since Nicodemus wasn't as public as they were about following Jesus? So Nicodemus takes this great royal effort to bury Jesus, and the women go on resurrection morning to do the work that was done already. Interesting. And this detail also shows that Nicodemus did not believe Jesus was going to rise from the dead. Probably the women not either, but that would be day 3 for them. But Nicodemus, with this great effort at burial, believed Jesus was gone. So what we do not know about Nicodemus, whether Nicodemus openly followed Jesus during his ministry ever, whether he witnessed the resurrection, where was he that day? His role, if any, in the early church, or details of his later life. We know so little. There's an apocryphal work under his name, the Gospel of Nicodemus, but this was produced mid-4th century and is mostly a reworking of the earlier Acts of Pilate, which recounts the harrowing of hell. So these apocryphal works, Gospel of Nicodemus, mid-4th century, obviously not written by Nicodemus, but co-opted. The Acts of Pilate. Isn't it interesting that somebody would think Pilate had something to say about Jesus? Anyway, just interesting. That's why we do nerding. Nicodemus is strongly embraced by the enslaved in America because of the Jesus teaching that we can be reborn. I think this is beautiful. Nicodemus comes at night. Enslaved believers often met secretly in those hush harbors to worship away from slaveholders' control. Night was not cowardice, it was survival. Nicodemus is spiritually hungry inside a system of power. Nicodemus grew in courage over time. Nicodemus first appears confused. Later, he cautiously defends Jesus in John 7. And finally, after the crucifixion, he publicly helps bury Jesus in John 19. That progression from hidden faith to costly identification resonated deeply to the enslaved. Enslaved believers often could not safely express public allegiance to Jesus, yet they trusted that quiet faithfulness could mature into courageous witness. Think about that progression even in your own life, and then think about it with our slave history. It's just... The new birth promise spoke directly to the enslaved. When Jesus tells Nicodemus he must be born again, it declares that identity is not defined by earthly status. Listen up, people. You may not be enslaved like our history has done to a whole people group, but you may be enslaved to an identity that is broken. So let me read that again. When Jesus tells Nicodemus he must be born again, it declares that identity is not defined by earthly status. In a world where enslaved people were legally treated as property, the idea that true life and worth came from God, not from slave codes, was revolutionary and deeply dignifying. At the time of Jesus' death, Joseph and Nicodemus were in public making the moves before the authorities. Meanwhile, the disciples at this time were in hiding, right? But not Joseph and not Nicodemus. Just interesting. As mentioned earlier, crucifixion worked for humiliation and the warning to others that the power was in charge. Bodies were left on the cross for shame, for birds to eat the bodies, for the decay, for the lesson to be taught. If Jesus was left on the cross to die, how would he have been resurrected? He would have been on that cross for more than 3 days, from Good Friday to resurrection. So why did Pilate grant Joseph's request for a proper burial? This defeats the purpose of the crucifixion. Think about that. Why would Pilate grant Joseph that request? And we ask you a further question that's kind of shocking, but maybe. Everything I teach here, we have a theology circle. We meet and we put everything, my thoughts go through their thoughts, and we group think and we put this together. We wondered. Going to learn about Pilate next week. Learned about these two rich men today. Did they bribe Pilate for the body? I don't know. Scripture doesn't tell us. But it does make you think, right? This is why we nerd. Because why would Pilate release the body off of the cross if the purpose of the cross was to teach a message? Why would Pilate say yes to Jewish leadership who he was in constant sparring with, which we will learn next week? Why? So just a bit. This is a picture of the Shroud of Turin. This is a picture from the BBC. So this is, I think, an accurate image of what the Shroud of Turin looks like. This is a linen cloth bearing the image of a man who appears to have suffered physical trauma in a manner consistent with crucifixion. Reddish-brown stains that have been said to include whole blood are found on the cloth, showing various wounds that, according to the proponents, correlate with the yellowish image, the pathophysiology of crucifixion, and the biblical description of the death of Jesus. Markings on the linen include: one wrist bears a large round wound claimed to be from piercing. The second wrist is hidden by the folding of the hands. Upward gouge in the side penetrating into the thoracic cavity. Proponents claim this was the post-mortem event, and there are separate components of red blood cells and serum draining from the lesion. Biblical, medically true. Small punctures around the forehead and scalp. Scores of linear wounds on the torso and legs. Proponents claim that the wounds are consistent with the distinctive dumbbell wounds of a Roman flagrum. Swelling of the face from severe beatings. Streams of blood down both arms. Proponents claim that blood drippings from the main flow occurred in response to gravity at an angle that would occur during crucifixion. And large puncture wounds in the feet as if pierced by a single spike. The Shroud of Turin is kept in the royal chapter of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, northern Italy. The shroud was damaged in a fire in 1532 in the chapel of Chambéry, France. There are some burn holes and scorched areas down both sides of the linen caused by contact with molten silver during the fire that burned through it in places where it was folded. Now, a new 3D image, digital analysis, published in Archaeometry, argues that the image on the shroud doesn't match the way a real human body would imprint. It is more consistent with a cloth draped over a low-relief sculpture rather than a real corpse. This suggests it may be a medieval artistic creation, not an actual burial cloth. Other scholars argue such 3D digital studies do not conclusively explain bloodstains or the unique nature of the image, emphasizing that no consensus has been reached. But still, the most well-known scientific test, carbon-14 dating from 1988, dated the shroud's linen to medieval times, roughly 1260 to 1390 AD. This is strongly suggesting it is not from the first century. And just to add one more thing, and this one kind of seals it for me, a newly discovered medieval document reinforces early skepticism about the shroud, indicating that even some clerics in the Middle Ages considered it to be a forgery. So even back in the day, in the medieval ages, the people who found it already considered it a forgery. So now, these 1,000 years later, we're still talking about it like it could be real? Or is it a forgery? We're nerding. I'm bringing this up. I'm going to go with the medieval clerics that maybe it's a forgery. But since we're nerding, again, I can't overlook this piece of history that some people are talking about. So here's our conversation time. I'm going to give you some questions. I hope you gathered with your people. You can talk about Shroud of Turin if you would like. If you have seen a documentary about it, share that. Share what you think or believe about it. It's just interesting. And here's some other questions I would like you to talk about. Is there room in faith for quiet or cautious disciples? What if I follow Jesus but am afraid of the cost? Think of these two men. When is the right moment to step forward? Can faith show up late and still matter? What is honorable about what these men did? Have that conversation. This crucifixion story is very core to our Christian faith. And we have, thankfully, because of the Gospels, a lot about this story that shapes us, moves us emotionally, moves us to become smarter. And here we learned about these two men. We really don't know much about them, but at this moment, at this point of history, they did some big things. Faith sometimes looks like that, doesn't it? It's following, it's day to day. You feel like you're just doing your small stuff. And then in a moment, you might be called on to do something. Will you do it? Will you face the discomfort and do something maybe bigger than you imagined that could affect the history of someone's life for the whole future? Will you do it? I'll see you again.